You're listening to Radio VR with me, Juliet Spare. Radicalisation has been described by the MI5 as the most serious danger to face the UK for the last century. Intelligence from MI6, MI5 and GCHQ estimate that around 400 young British Muslims have travelled to the Middle East to join the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant. In the last few days, it's been confirmed that 16-year-old twin girls from Manchester left their family home 10 days ago and travelled to Syria. The teenagers flew to Turkey from Manchester International Airport. There's now widespread concern that they've pledged allegiance to ISIS forces fighting in the Middle East. Newspaper reports say that the twin girls have since called their parents to say they are in Syria and that they do not plan to return. It's also emerged that the girls, originally from Somalia, are both very high academic achievers. So is the radicalisation of young women a new phenomenon, or is it that the attention has been too focused on the radicalisation of young men? Taking part in this discussion is Sarah Khan, director and co-founder of Inspire, a counter-extremism and human rights organisation. Jonathan Birdwell, head of the Citizenship and Political Participation Programme of Demos, a think tank specialising in radicalisation and Islam in Europe and Canada. And Hadiya from Century, an organisation that addresses the issues of Islamist radicalisation amongst Muslim youths and educates other organisations about the nature of radical groups, their theory and practices. Joining us on Skype is Dr. Edith Schlaffer, founder and executive director of Women Without Borders, and in 2008 she launched SAVE, Sisters Against Violent Extremism, the world's first female counter-terrorism platform. Sarah Khan, I'll start with you. Is the radicalisation of young women a new phenomenon?
I think when we talk about the radicalisation of Muslim women in the United Kingdom, I think we have to be aware that we're talking about a very small number of women, and we have to put that into context. I think my concern, though, however, having stated that just now, is that I think we're witnessing a new phenomenon, particularly in the last 10 years, where we are seeing Muslim women becoming radicalised. And just to give a couple of examples, for example, in 2010, I think it was, Rushanara Chowdhury was named to be the first British person inspired by Al-Qaeda to try and assassinate a prominent figure on UK soil, who was, of course, the MP Stephen Timms. We've had lots of media reports about Samantha Lewthwaite, the White Widow, who was the former widow of Jermaine Lindsay, the 7/7 bomber, and how she's been accused of orchestrating a grenade attack at non-Muslim places of worship and at a bar in Mombasa. We've had the convert Rebecca Dawson, who was convicted last year of glorifying terrorism and inciting murder alongside with her husband. We've had last year Channel 4 News showing how British Muslim women have been travelling to Syria to support their husbands and taking part in the jihadi cause. And now again these two teen girls from Manchester. So they are small numbers, let's be very clear about that, but I think we are witnessing a trend, and it's a worrying trend, and we should do as much as we can to try and discourage women from going, because it is, I think, a new phenomenon.
Hadiya, you are from Century, an organisation that addresses the issues of Islamic radicalisation amongst Muslim youths and educates other organisations. How much of a worrying trend do you see, and how much intervention is taking place in order to combat this growing phenomena?
Well, I've had a lot of insight into these groups from my background. So I know that there's always been women who have been radicalised just as much as men. Within the groups, you'll see that they focus on women and men in a lot of the radical groups. If you go to their websites, they have specific sections for women to converse and chat rooms. So it's very much something that goes on with women as well as men, and sometimes on a similar scale. But obviously, the men have a more active. They travel. They've got a little bit more freedom to go out and about. Whereas the women, they find other ways of contributing, in inverted commas, to their cause. So they would, discuss more with people, try to recruit people, and do it in a more subtle way. And with my work that I do on interventions, there are very, very, very few cases, but those cases are with young individual women who do feel the problem and want to contribute. And my job is to offer alternatives, but the sad realisation is that there isn't much alternative to offer these young children. Well, I'm calling them children. To me, they are young adults. So that's the dilemma I find myself in, is when I'm trying to speak to these young girls, to give them the alternative, to get them to see a different path, to get them to see the complications of the issues, because they just see black and white, which is what most of these radical groups do. They just see only, this is a problem, we need a solution, and the solutions are very basic.
Are there parallels between the particular backgrounds of some young girls and some young boys who are susceptible to being radicalised?
The people that I've encountered are all very intelligent, and as you've seen, the two twins have got 28 GCSEs between them. Who has that nowadays? So they are intelligent. They have heightened emotions. I think they really feel the plight of these people, and the way that they're probably being discussed with is that these people are your family, and you can't sit back and do nothing. So they've felt the calling more than maybe other girls have, and that's what made them go up and take the move, as well as a kudos as well. You can't, rule out that idea of, if the group that they're hanging out with, they're going to get recognition for going out there. They're going to, it's like winning an Oscar or the awards, or any group that you want some kind of accolade, and this is no different. So there is that factor, I believe.
Before I come to the other guests, Sarah Khan, you just stipulated you wanted to say something then.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that I think sometimes we think, women, and they are not going to go down the routes of terrorism. They are the nurturers of life, they give birth to life, and they nurture and raise children. So I think when we hear about women being radicalised or committing acts of terror, we find it as a society shocking. And I think there's a lot of gender stereotyping that goes on, that women, they are far more likely to be easily brainwashed or influenced. And actually that's not true, because there's a lot of evidence that shows that there is no real difference between male and female terrorists. And actually they show equal amounts of ideological fervour. They can show equal amounts of brutality, of recruitment and motivation. So I think as a society we seem to struggle with it, the idea that women can't be possibly being radicalised and being doing acts of terror. But actually the evidence doesn't necessarily support that view at all.
Dr. Edith Schlaffer, you launched SAFE, Sisters Against Violent Extremism. Hadia spoke about, when she speaks to the young girls, has to really think actually what else is out there, what are the alternatives. Are you able to talk about alternatives when it comes to preventing young girls or females being radicalised?
This is a key question, because when we look at the jihadist narratives and what is to the appeal of particularly now the current Syrian jihad, how fast can we produce the alternatives? They are way ahead. The recruiters, the ideologists, they are way ahead of the game. So we are in a very uncomfortable situation of looking at the problem long term, and this is sometimes a problem, because we always have to react immediately, and we don't develop these long-term strategies. And this is a failure on the civil society level as well as on all other levels of engagement. And so far we know that there's no terrorist profile, no one path or timetable to extremism. And now we are so flabbergasted that women are also drawn into it. And it's certainly worthwhile paying attention to the various ways the different genders are drawn into it. But the key questions are the same, I think. It's the identity crisis in adolescence and in young adulthood, the risk factors on a personal and societal level, and the emotional vulnerability. Where does it come from? And why is the personal victimization and the strong identification with grievances from distant lands so appealing? You see, what is going wrong in our societies that we can't kind of come up with persuasive alternatives? Why can't we establish, dialogue is such a big word, but why can't we establish a meaningful dialogue, an appealing dialogue with these young people, with the children, as Hedaya rightfully says? They directly walk from their war games in their living rooms to war in real time out there in distant lands. So I think we really have to think who are the key players in the lives of these people, and this is the work of SAFE. We look at the family members. What role could they play if they would be confident enough and if they would be equipped with the right knowledge and with the tools to find the right way to engage with the young people. We realize in many of the conversations and also in the recent survey we have carried out that the mothers, the fathers, the close family members are at loss, and their first reaction when they trace some suspicion of radicalization in the children, that they try to kind of procrastinate any action or try to not really deal with it because they don't know how they would properly deal with it. They don't find the language. This is important because terrorists don't fall from the skies. They are bred somewhere, and the family unit, the community is the most immediate environment of these young people.
Thank you, Edith. To introduce Jonathan Birdwell into the discussion, head of the Citizenship and Political Participation Programme at think tank Demos. Edith mentioned then an uncomfortable situation we're living in. How many parallels can you draw between other communities growing up in Britain who are lacking the leadership or an authority or a parent to see somewhere an alternative to the route that they are going down?
Well, I think as Sora said, I think we've seen it over the kind of past 10 years. There is an extent, obviously, with Syria being in the situation that it is for the past couple of years, that's acted as a galvanizing force for people who, believe in kind of Islamist, kind of more radical ideas. But I think a lot of what we've been saying is I totally agree with. I think I personally think we make too much of this issue. I think in particular the attention that the media tends to give it is way out of proportion with the size of the threat. And, I think these comments were made by Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, just a few days ago at RUSI, is that we make too much about, what are effectively teenagers who are seeking some kind of excitement, and they think it's glamorous to go abroad and pretend they're kind of these, courageous fighters. And I think the media attention feeds into that glamour. And so I think that has to be looked at. And I think, of course, there might be a risk of people going to Syria, coming back with certain kind of violent tendencies and know-how and wanting to enact attacks here in the UK. But I think the security services can deal with that. I don't think we should make too much of it in terms of the press, because I think it just serves to demonize the Muslim community and further isolate them and further exacerbates the problem.
When this issue is reported in the press to the extent that it has been recently, and my question initially to all of you was, sometimes are the British tabloids working the situation up, which you've really answered there. Are we thinking, or do we ever think about the impact it has on the families in these communities and what they go through when their children have decided to follow this path?
I would like to respond to that. We worked closely with Aisha al-Wafi, the mother of the so-called 20th bombers of the 9/11 attacks. And she argued that actually as a mother of a perpetrator, or a potential perpetrator, you're always in a very bad position. So listening to the voices of victims is a very different story. But listening to the voices of family members of potential or actual perpetrators would be very important, because this would help a community cohesion. These parents did not choose, to sit in this chair, from which now they have to answer all these questions, why their children left and why they didn't maybe take better care, or to which mosque they would have sent them. So I think this would be a new way and a serious way of community engagement, and to deal with these issues of the threat of radicalization, and learn more about the lure and actually the first signs and of radicalization. I think this would be important, and also not to demonize these families. When I look at this whole thing of radicalization of women, for example, is certainly not a new phenomenon. When you look at Germany and the history there of the RAF movement, women were even in the leadership positions. In terms of reaching out and learning to family members of those who departed, I think it would be a very interesting way forward. I think we need to learn now and not sensationalize. I totally agree with the last speaker that we kind of do the work of the editors, and the editors and the publishers in the current Western media kind of collaborate with the jihadists and their messages, giving them prime time media space and international attention. I think this should be handled by the security forces and those who know how to deal with it, and not to create this huge media hype. And we should rather work on the community level to learn more and support these family members. And this would travel, I think, better in terms of prevention and collecting evidence and collecting some experience on our side, how to contain the threat.
You can't see us in the studio here, but Sarah's desperate to contribute to the discussion. Sarah?
Yeah, and I was just going to say that I think it's absolutely right that we don't demonize the families. Most of the times, most of those families, they've absolutely no idea that their children have gone off. Whether it was the 7/7 bombers, their parents, they had absolutely no idea that their children were capable even of committing such atrocities. Even if you look at the families of the Cardiff boys who've gone now to Syria and have joined ISIS, the pleas of the mothers. I mean, one mother, she was just crying, saying, "You've broken my heart. You have no idea how you've broken my heart. Please come back." So, and as a society, I think it's very important that we don't demonise them, because if you look what happened to Samantha Lewthwaite, that's exactly what happened to her. She felt as if the whole of society had rejected her. And I kind of wonder, look, did that play a role in her own radicalisation, that she was facing so much attention and focus and rejection by society, that her husband had gone and committed the 7/7 atrocity, whether that contributed to her own radicalisation. So I think it's really important, and that we are very careful as a society that we assist these families. And actually these families themselves can play a very important role. I was watching on the news just a few months ago how of a mother in Saudi Arabia. She had found out that her son had gone and joined one of the extremist organisations in Syria, the rebel organisations. And she went on to a national TV show crying, saying, "How could you do this? I feel let down by the scholars." And that, funnily enough, that message actually reached her son, and he actually came back and said, "I was brainwashed and it was wrong, and what my mother said had a really powerful impact on me." So I think, again, as parents, we need to work with parents. We cannot demonise them or reject them. They need our help as a society. And actually they can help to maybe bring back and influence their children in a more positive way.
Do you, Hadija, find that you're hopeful with your intervention strategies that you will be able to intervene and prevent this issue becoming a bigger problem?
Yeah, I think at the moment the way the channel and the Prevent are working, tackling individuals who have flagged up, it's a good way, instead of like before they're branding whole communities, which was very, very dangerous. If you look at most of the people who refer the interventions on are people from the families, concerned parents, concerned mothers, that their children need some help. They're looking for support, and that's the only thing available. So I'm always trying to comfort the parents and create dialogue and discussion and keep it open, keep it healthy, keep it safe for them to discuss their issues. Because at the end of the day, situations within the Muslim lands are worsening. They're absolutely going crazy. And the frustration is also becoming worse. And if we don't have an outlet or safe discussions about this, then we can't, come to a solution. And, not only the media, it fans the flames a lot. So I find that, a lot of the issues come from the media. Some young girls are like, well, every time I look at the newspaper, it's demonising Muslims. Where can we go? What can we do? What are the alternatives? It's a long process. It's a mentoring, counselling type of process, but I think it's working, and it's the only thing that's out there at the moment to help young families and young individuals.
Jonathan, also furiously writing there, where do you think this forum and discussion should be taking place that Hadija mentioned there?
Well, I think these conversations are going on a daily basis already in communities through stakeholders. I mean, Prevent, for all its issues, has been around for quite a while. I think, in certain areas it might need improvement, but in other areas I think there are really strong partnerships at the key kind of institutions, whether it's schools or religious institutions, the local authority and police. So I think a lot of that work's going on. And of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that some people are going to not be persuaded and they're going to still continue to want to go to Syria. But what I don't think will be helpful is removing their passports or putting them in jail, because we have a serious issue with radicalization in UK prisons. So I think this plays in a little bit to the media focus. With the media continually focusing on it, politicians feel they need to act tough. One way of acting tough is removing the passports and saying they're fake, they're going to be thrown in jail, when I think that's just going to make the problem worse. So I think a lot of the prevent stuff is already going on. I'm sure my fellow guests do a lot of that work and can speak more to it. But I don't think removing their passports or throwing them in jail is the right response.
Is the radicalisation of young girls a new issue for the media to take hold of, or is this something that is just the new focus and removing the focus away from young men?
I think what Sarah is saying, it's always been going on, and we do find it a shock whenever the women come to the forefront and actually get off on a plane and go off to fight. So that's it is shocking for society, and another lovely piece of news for the media and their ongoing onslaught of Muslims. But it has always been going on. We should look at men and women equally, because they're all susceptible to radicalisation, and women are just as passionate about the causes that the men are. We could focus on kind of putting the flames out with the women, because they may be more susceptible to listening to alternatives, and then spreading the alternative views, positive views, within their families and within wider societies, their husbands, their brothers. Maybe they could call them back if we approach them in a correct manner.
Another hopeful end, and a final word from you, Sarah.
Yeah, and I think I was just going to say that I think, this issue of tackling extremism in the country, it doesn't just fall on the responsibility of British Muslim communities. It's on all of us as a country, actually. It's on all the different institutions, our schools, our prisons. And I think there's a tendency for the media to focus on, what are British Muslim communities doing? There are lots of different organisations within Muslim communities that are doing fantastic work. So really it's more of what are we as a country doing to tackle extremism. And I think other aspects really is that we need to address the issues of alienation and marginalisation that exist amongst Muslim communities, particularly with Muslim youth. I mean, Hadia mentioned how young Muslim girls will be opening up the papers and every day seeing something related to, anti-Muslim prejudice. And of course, we also know that the victims of most anti-Muslim prejudice in this country are women. The ones that are experiencing the attacks on the streets are women. And again, how does that feed into this narrative of them being radicalised? If they're experiencing abuse on the streets or online, that is something that should concern us. And finally, really, just that we need to give women greater role models and to show them that, look, there is another way that you can build bridges in our society, not burn them, that there are amazing role models in our world. I mean, just to name one, I mean, Dr. Hawa Abdi, who, has fought against extremists in Somalia. I mean, she's a great role model and working to build up her society and contributing to civil society. That's, as Muslim women, there are great Muslim women in our world who are, fighting extremism and doing so in the name of their faith. So what we need to do is to tackle the ideology that frames young Muslim minds and thinking that this is what Islam advocates, and promoting a far more mainstream and progressive view where we're saying actually Muslims should be at the forefront of combating extremists as their faith dictates.
Jonathan Birdwell, I read in one of your reports that we really need to understand the community to prevent alienation of a very young generation of Muslims growing up in Europe.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we've been already speaking about since 7/7 the importance of a community-based approach, and I think a lot of that was because when 7/7 happened, suddenly there was this need to engage with people within the Muslim community, and those connections simply weren't there. And what you had was a lot of people coming up and self-appointing themselves as kind of community gatekeepers, and they weren't really representing people. And really, the government's been kind of navigating that for the past 6 to 7 years. So, but nonetheless, so I think that the community-based approach is really important, but it's really difficult. And it's not, as Sarah said, it's not just about the Muslim community itself. You do need, obviously, key partners within the Muslim community, but it's about the wider community as well, in terms of schools, local authorities, the police, universities. All of these people have to be partners within the kind of Prevent program. And a lot of this work is already being done, on a daily basis. So I think that work is already out there. But of course, in communities, it has to be the place where these issues are tackled.
Edith, then, does the story that has emerged of these twin girls who have gone to Syria, and as shocking as that may be to society, and the focus here is then talking about the radicalisation of women alongside the radicalisation of men. Is there a difference?
Well, I think we also have to realize that a number of these people who go out there are converts, so they didn't grow up as Muslims, but they are drawn by these ideologists and recruiters. I think this is very interesting. And where I still, it's correct, a lot of work is going on and has been done, but obviously not sufficiently and maybe not in the right fashion. Where I see a huge void is the work within the families. The families often seem to be at loss. I think this is a new arena of counterterrorism messaging, if I might put it like this. And what we find is that family members trust each other. So if they get the right support, how to address these delicate issues and how to address any delicate issues. It's not only radicalization, it's also drug abuse. It's, all the challenges with which the youngsters have to deal today. So we need to kind of look closer into the family interactions and equip the families with the right tools, to interact before they run out and expose themselves to the communities and, put the pressure on the communities. It really starts at home. Okay. So I think we have to create these allies in the home as a new angle in counterterrorism efforts, and we need to pay attention to this.
That was Dr. Edith Schlaffer there, founder and executive director of Women Without Borders and also SAVE, Sisters Against Violent Extremism. Taking part in the discussion was Sarah Khan, director and co-founder of Inspire, a counter-extremism and human rights organisation. Jonathan Birdwell, head of the Citizenship and Political Participation Programme of Demos, the think tank, and Hadia from Century, an organisation that addresses the issues of Islamist radicalisation amongst Muslim youths. Thank you to all my guests.